All right, so you wanted to dive into something pretty big, huh? China's economic transformation specifically. That shift from exports to, well, something new. Innovation and domestic consumption.
Yeah.
Like, how do they even start to make that kind of change?
Yeah, it's huge. And we've actually got this interesting source. It's excerpts from this Chinese book called Growth Logic. And it's got all these insights from Edmund Phelps. You know, he won a Nobel Prize in economics, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that alone is pretty fascinating. A Western economist's perspective woven into this text meant for a Chinese audience.
It's really cool, yeah.
So, okay, how does China even begin to make a shift this massive?
Well, they had that initial boom, right? The one everyone knows about, leveraging that low-cost labor for all that export manufacturing.
Oh, yeah, the classic made in China story we've all seen play out over the years.
Exactly. Huge migration from rural areas to those factories, a surge in investment, and then, you know, GDP and wages get a big boost.
Right, but the book brings up this this analogy of low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, what happens when all those easy gains are gone?
That's a great point, yeah. And that's the challenge China's facing now, this model. I mean, can it really just keep going forever?
Seems like something's got to give.
Right. And the book and some speeches from Chinese academics, too, they all argue that, you know, it can't. I mean, think about it. Rising labor costs, potential market saturation for those exports, and even, like, restrictions on getting their hands on the most advanced tech.
Ah, yeah, that's a big one. Companies and governments in the West, they're kind of clamping down, aren't they?
Definitely. So all that's a sign, right? They need a new approach.
So it's like hitting a ceiling.
Yeah.
But how does a country the size of China even begin to shift gears like that?
That's where it gets really interesting. I mean, they can't just keep doing what worked before, right? They've got to move towards higher productivity, more sophisticated manufacturing. And, you know, it seems like one of the most important things is they need to create this culture of grassroots innovation.
Okay, grassroots innovation. Now, that's a phrase that jumps out, yeah. I get the innovation part. But what makes it grassroots?
Well, think of it this way. It can't just be happening in big research labs or, you know, government-led projects. They need to encourage individuals, entrepreneurs, you know, that kind of willingness to experiment, even at the smallest levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, doesn't that clash with how China's always done things? That top-down, centralized approach. How do you even, like, reconcile those two ideas?
It's definitely a tension. The book acknowledges that. Some people argue that China, with its history of, like, social harmony and conformity, maybe that'll make it harder to get that disruptive, individualistic thinking, you know what I mean? The kind that really drives innovation.
Yeah, like some kind of cultural roadblock to becoming what?
Yeah.
A true innovation powerhouse.
That's the big question. Phelps doesn't really give a simple answer, but there's this fascinating evidence he points to. Back in the 90s, they ranked 4th globally for innovation, and he thinks they could pass the UK and Canada soon.
So maybe it's happening already.
Could be. But there's still this other huge question, right? How do they stop relying so much on exports? What does a consumption-led China even look like? Well, imagine if most of their growth is driven by domestic spending. Like, if Chinese citizens just have more wealth, more purchasing power, that drives demand for all kinds of new stuff.
So it's like creating this cycle where innovation leads to better jobs, better pay, and that fuels even more spending at home.
Exactly. The book predicts a surge in, like, high-tech investment and that move away from low-cost manufacturing, you know.
Yeah.
But the key thing is more Chinese people need to be part of the whole process, from, like, the initial idea all the way to actually using those innovations every day.
It's like you need a whole new economic culture.
Yeah. And that brings us to this other really fascinating part of the book. Phelps actually dives into the strengths and weaknesses of both socialist and capitalist systems.
Now, that's a topic that could get a little heated.
Yeah, but it's actually pretty nuanced how he lays it out.
So, okay, we were saying that China wants to become more self-sufficient, you know, less reliant on those exports to keep things growing. But what does that even mean for the rest of the world? It sounds like a pretty big shift.
Oh, it is. If they actually pull this off, you know, this whole consumption-led economy thing, it could have huge ripple effects.
That's like the optimistic take, right?
Right.
But are there any downsides? Could this create new problems for other countries?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, if China becomes more inward-looking, it might lead to more competition between countries.
Right. Makes sense. And it could also disrupt all those global supply chains, right? If China starts prioritizing their own domestic production, like making sure things are made at home.
Exactly. If they're really trying to boost spending within China, it makes sense to keep those products made domestically.
But, we talked about that economic culture idea earlier. I'm still kind of fuzzy on what it actually means and how it all ties into China's future.
Yeah, you're right to focus on that. Phelps really thinks it's crucial. He compares a nation's economic culture to the soil where innovation grows. You can plant all the seeds you want, but if the soil's no good, nothing will grow.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Mm.
But what makes for good soil, so to speak? What are the qualities of an economic culture that helps innovation really flourish?
Well, Phelps says it's got to have a few things. You need individualism, you need people who are okay with taking risks and even failing sometimes, and a willingness to try new things. You need to create an environment where people feel like they can challenge the status quo, think outside the box, even if those ideas seem, a little crazy at first.
It sounds like he's describing like a Silicon Valley kind of mindset, that whole move fast and break things mentality.
Right. But China's culture has always been more about, conformity and respecting authority. So how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's the big question.
It's a big one. And it's something that Phelps spends a lot of time on in Growth Logic. He knows that China's cultural heritage doesn't necessarily line up perfectly with this individualistic, approach to innovation. But he also sees signs that things are changing.
What kind of signs?
Look at how many entrepreneurs there are now in China, and all that investment in research and development. Plus, there's this general shift toward a more market-driven economy, right? It's like there's this tug of war happening between those deep-rooted traditions and this new spirit of, entrepreneurship and innovation that's bubbling up.
It's pretty exciting to think that China could become this global hub for innovation, like shaping the future for everyone, not just themselves. But what if we play devil's advocate for a second? Didn't the book hint at some potential pitfalls, on this path they're on?
Oh, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest challenges they could face is something economists call the middle income trap.
I think I've heard of that, but remind me, what does that even mean?
Basically, it's when a country gets to a certain level of income and development, but can't seem to break through to that next level.
So they get stuck.
Yeah, kind of stuck in the middle. And it usually happens when that initial growth model, the one that worked so well in the beginning, it just stops being as effective. Wages go up, and they need to move into more sophisticated industries.
And the book says China could fall into that trap.
The argument is that they have to be really careful about avoiding it. They can't just keep doing what they've been doing. They've got to really embrace innovation, move away from, just relying on cheap manufacturing, invest in higher value industries.
This is like they need to reinvent themselves.
Right, to stay competitive. And that reinvention also has to deal with another really big challenge that Phelps talks about: income inequality.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic problem in rapidly developing economies. The benefits don't always reach everyone equally.
Exactly. Growth Logic argues that China needs to find ways to make sure that everyone benefits from their economic progress.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. But if some boats get left behind, that's a problem. It can lead to all sorts of instability, which, in the end, hurts the whole system.
That's a great point. And it seems like the Chinese government knows this is a challenge. They've been doing things to try to reduce poverty and, strengthen their social safety net. But it's tough, right, to find that perfect balance between growing the economy and making sure everyone benefits.
A lot to juggle.
Yeah.
So what does the book say about the long-term consequences? What could happen as a result of this big transformation?
Well, that's something we'll dive into in the last part of this deep dive. We'll look at all the potential scenarios for China and for the rest of the world.
So we've talked about those challenges, right? The middle income trap, inequality, all that potential for, things getting shaken up globally.
Yeah.
But what if China actually pulls this off? They dodge all those obstacles and really become this innovation powerhouse, this consumption-led economy. What could that future look like?
I mean, the possibilities are pretty huge. Imagine China as not just the world's factory anymore, but a leader, right? In cutting-edge tech, breakthroughs in science, all these new entrepreneurial ventures. Think about it. New industries, totally new products. Maybe they even come up with solutions to some of the world's biggest problems.
That's kind of mind-blowing, honestly. But what about, the balance of power? I mean, globally, if China really becomes that epicenter of innovation, what happens to everyone else, especially, the West?
Yeah.
They've been the dominant force for, forever.
That's one of the most interesting questions. And Growth Logic, I mean, it doesn't give us all the answers, right? No one really can at this point. But it definitely gives us some things to think about.
Like what?
Well, Phelps thinks he thinks a more innovative and powerful China economically, I mean, it could lead to a real shift in global influence. We might see power becoming more, evenly distributed, and China would have a much bigger role in, well, basically everything, global affairs.
That would be a big change from the way things have been. But couldn't it also create some, like, new opportunities? If China is at the forefront, leading the way in innovation, wouldn't other countries want to be a part of that?
Oh, definitely. It doesn't have to be like a zero-sum game where someone wins and someone loses. I mean, there's definitely potential for everyone to benefit from China's innovation. Think about like renewable energy, advancements in healthcare tech, even space exploration. These are things China could really contribute to, things that could have a positive impact, for the whole planet.
So it's almost like we're at a crossroads. So all these different paths we could go down. But does it say anything about whether China can actually pull this off? Do they have what it takes to become this innovation powerhouse Phelps is talking about?
Well, Phelps has sort of a mixed perspective on that. He does say that some people are worried about, those traditional values in China, conformity, harmony, all that. Could that clash with the kind of individualistic, risk-taking mindset you need for real innovation?
Yeah, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier.
Right. But he also points to, the evidence. China's already making some big advancements in tech, and they're putting more and more money into research and development. So there are definitely signs that they're moving in the right direction.
So it's a bit of a gamble, right? There's no guarantee.
Yeah.
But the potential payoff is enormous.
Exactly. And it seems like a gamble that China's willing to take. And growth logic, it doesn't just talk about, the theory. It actually highlights some specific steps China's taking. Things like investing in education and research, putting policies in place to encourage entrepreneurs, attracting foreign investment, all that stuff.
It's pretty amazing to watch. Even from, all the way over here, this whole deep dive has really made me think. I feel like I have a much better grasp on what's going on in China and what it might mean for the rest of us.
I agree. And it's not over, right? This whole thing is going to keep unfolding for years to come.
Yeah, it's a story we're all going to be watching pretty closely. Well, this has been a fantastic exploration of China's economic evolution. We've covered a ton of ground, but it's just the beginning, right? There's so much more out there to discover and learn. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and you never know. Maybe you'll be the one to come up with the next big idea that shapes, the future. Until next time.